I'm just going to wait a couple more minutes. People are trickling in. Yeah. Hi, everyone. Can you hear me? Hi, Ben. Welcome to Anderson Ranch. My name is Andrea Wallace. I'm the Vice President of Artistic Affairs. And this is one of my favorite programs that we have, the faculty lectures. And so we're really excited to be able to present faculty and visiting artist lectures. The person I'm presenting tonight is a visiting artist this week at the ranch. Before we get started, if you have a cell phone, if you could just reach into your pocket and turn it off or put it on mute. I want to welcome Ken Gonzalez-Day, who's an LA-based artist whose interdisciplinary practice considers the historical construction of race and the limits of representational systems ranging from lynching photographs to museum displays. His ongoing and widely exhibited Erased Lynching series, along with the publication of Lynching in the West, 1850 to 1935, transformed the understanding of radicalized violence in the United States and raised awareness of the lynching of Latinos, Native Americans, Asians, and African Americans in California, and helped to ground anti-immigration and collective acts of violence within the larger discussion of racial formation, policing, and racial justice movements. The series has toured and traveled in exhibitions staged by the LA County Museum of Art, the Smithsonian Institution, the Minnesota Museum of American Art, and appeared at the Tamayo Museum, among other venues. His book, which we have here, if anyone's interested, can talk to us afterwards, works from the Profiled series have been exhibited internationally and grew out of research into the history of racial depiction found in historic expositions and educational museum displays from the Trocadero Museum in Paris. In 2017, he received a Guggenheim Fellowship in Photography, and he was awarded the Fletcher Jones Chair in Art at Scripps College, where he is the Chair and Professor of Art. He's represented by Luis de Jesus, LA. Please give a warm ranch welcome to Ken Gonzalez-Day.
How is everybody? Okay? Yes. Can you hear me in the back? Yes. Did everybody get a cookie? Yes. I only had one, so when I sugar crash in half an hour, you'll know. You'll know it's done. I'm going to set my timer for 44 minutes. No, I'm going to set it for 40 minutes. All right. I could talk all day. I could talk all night. But I know you have things to do and things to think about. So I'm going to try to cover two different projects. One, the Erased Lynching series, because that's probably what I'm most known for and is something that a lot of people like to learn about. And then the second, we'll look a little bit at the Profiled series. I'm starting out here with a billboard that was part of the For Freedom's 50 States Initiative, which was basically an attempt to put billboards in all 50 states of the United States during the midterm elections last time. And it was an attempt to try to see if art matters. Right? We know that we're not trying to sell anything, right? A billboard has a purpose, but can exposing people to art in their daily lives contribute to their understanding of the world, right? And so I think for those of us that are here, you clearly believe in art. We believe that it can make a difference. And so those are some of the questions we're getting to. Yeah. Go ahead. Testing, 1, 2, 3, testing. Better? Clear? Okay, cool. So this was up, and basically you're going to see this image in a little bit. Democracies Can Fail was added to the original photographic image, And that was a quotation I heard from former President Obama at a dinner in LA, not an intimate dinner, a dinner with 6,000 people that I was at. But I truly, as an American, I had never imagined, this was 2018, I had never imagined that democracy could fail. It never occurred to me. And his talk was so moving to me. And I just thought that this was really an important election and an important time. And so I sort of wanted to, I felt very honored to be able to try to contribute to that. So unlike the average exhibition, so if I have a photo exhibition, okay, my 10 friends come, my mom likes it on Facebook, and we don't necessarily know the full impact. In this particular case, 6 million people drove past this billboard. So yes, we know not all 6 million were impacted, but maybe some were, right? And so I think when we think about art making, we have to think about audience. We have to think about our intentions, and we have to think about its reception. So those are things that are going to be true for all of us here as we work through our projects, right, during our residencies. So that's where I wanted to start. And then, of course, I wanted to do land acknowledgement, which I borrowed from the Anderson Ranch page, which is to acknowledge that this site resides on the traditional ancestral territory of the Ute people, who called the Roaring Fork Valley and beyond home for over 800 years, in keeping with the center's commitment to partner and honor the indigenous ancestors and residents of this sacred land, where we learn, work, and create. And I also have an ancestor who was Apache, which would have been from the Four Corners region, a great. So I'm not claiming it, I'm Latino, but just in terms of thinking about overlaps of this land and of its history. And my father was born 4 hours south of here, and my grandfather was born 6 hours south of here in Taos. So there are a lot of overlaps for thinking about this place. And actually, Paul Soldner, you may know, was one of the people who created this space, used to teach at Scripps College where I teach. So I knew Paul a little bit. He was at the end of his teaching career, but we worked together briefly. So just to give you some other possible connections for thinking about how I might fit in here or how I might be able to contribute to this space. And then, because it just happened, I had to at least share the reference to our living moment, this moment in our history that we are all responsible for. And for those that didn't follow it or don't follow it closely, I just wanted to highlight this idea that there's an allegation that was made that basically, right, aware of the rioters' chance to hang Mike Pence, the president responded with this sentiment: maybe our supporters have the right idea. Mike Pence deserves it. My only point for today is to bring up this invocation of a hanging or a lynching as being one of the longest and oldest traditions in America, longer than baseball, more American than baseball. So the idea of using violent means to terrorize different communities and to exterminate them and to put people in their place, right, to put us in our place, whatever community we belong to, is as old as the nation itself, and something that we're going to learn more about in a second. So I just had that as a reference. And then the other reference, when we think about what is a mob, what is a riot, what is lynching? How did that happen? That wasn't us. Those are different people, not like me. What are the conditions that make such actions possible, right? And do we live in those conditions now, right? And how close or how far we are from those conditions? So these are things I wanted us to think about in terms of our own time, so that my work is talking about a history, but I think that history is relevant for our own moment. And so these are just departure points, which we'll, again, have a chance to think about more. And hopefully you guys can think of some good questions to ask me at the end, and we could sort of engage more deeply in whatever interests you most. So then we flip the clock back a bit, and this is an image of vigilantes in San Jose, California in 1933, breaking down the door of the police station, which held two prisoners who were arrested and being held. So in this case, the lynching didn't take place because they were running loose. They were in custody. And you can see that they've used a handy 20-foot pipe. Now, where do you get a handy 20-foot pipe when something is spontaneous? So a lot of the mythology around vigilante and lynchings is that they're spontaneous actions. But one of the things you can learn tonight is that they're not. They're a reflection of intentionality that are deeply rooted in communities. And so in this particular case, this community was building a post office right next door, and they knew that this was the plumbing pipe that was in the basement, and they went and got it. And you can see the scrapes that it took. And for those of you that are here to study photography, you might also think about what is the role of photography in depicting notions of truth, in distorting the way we understand communities and acts of violence. If you look here in the corner, what's that thing? Oh, it's a light bulb. Well, now nobody put a light bulb on the floor, so that has to be a flash bulb. It's 1933, and for those of you that know your photo history, you know that the flash bulb is a brand new invention. So what is the first thing photographers photograph when they have this new tool that allows them to see at night? One of the first images, of course, is images of killing, lynchings, and often racial terror against African Americans. So that is a legacy that we all carry with us, and particularly for those of us doing photography or documentary, because I know there's a group working on that. Where does our responsibility begin and end? How do we know if we're on the right side of history? How will an image be read 90 years later? And then, again, thinking back to that January 6th image of the rioters as they take over, or attempted to take over our nation's capital and to end democracy as we know it. You see here this idea of pleasure, the glee. So this is after this crowd of over 6,000 people had lynched these two men that you saw sort of being broken out of the prison. And you can see that this is probably taken, so the lynching takes place about 1 in the morning. This is probably 2 or 3 in the morning. It's still nighttime. The sun's not up yet, so we know it's still nighttime. They are not sad about their actions, right? They're ecstatic. And so I wanted to show this to show the connection between January 6th imagery you've seen of people just enthralled with their power, and that power can be conflated with pleasure, and that pleasure can be conflated with morality. And so I think we need to separate the notions of pleasure from moral rightness. And so these are just ideas I'm introducing to you to think about. This image, if you are wondering, it's been painted on by the newspaper, which is going to use it. They're basically going to rephotograph it to make a newspaper. And so what is painted white will become black and white on the printed page in 1933. No talk on lynching can really be addressed without at least acknowledging the book Without Sanctuary. And I know this is, there's a bit of history in this talk, and I know you're not all probably familiar with all of it, and some of you are probably very familiar. So I'm just going to say that this is a reference for those wanting to know more. It was the first publication to include over 100 images of lynching from lynching postcards, primarily of African Americans. The book includes essays and really raised national awareness of the history of racialized violence in America. Published in 2000, I was already working on my book when this book came out. And so if you've ever worked on a project and then have somebody else do something incredibly similar, I was like, at first, crestfallen, like, oh my God, my project has no value. But in fact, looking through this book, I discovered that there were only 5 cases from the state of California. And so, in fact, it actually liberated me and allowed me to refocus my project and to narrow my focus. So again, thinking about the way that your practice might change based on all kinds of circumstances that are not in your control. And I ended up publishing a book called Lynching the West, which is the first and only book to document the history of lynching in California. I document over 354 cases in the state of California. And these are some of the kinds of markers that we have in the state, which basically celebrate this idea of what in California was often thought of as race neutral, meaning, oh yeah, we hung these people, but it wasn't about race, right? And that was the mythology that you still will find in many textbooks that are still being taught to your family members and children in school, and there's no corrected textbook yet. And here's the first woman being lynched in California, Mexican woman. Again, much longer story. I'm going to just save that details of those cases for later should we need them. Otherwise, I have a lot of information on my website. And then just super quick summary, just to make sure that I'm really clear about my intentions of this talk. Individuals of all races, genders, and sexual orientations were lynched in the United States since its founding, point 1. Point 2, according to the Equal Justice Initiative, EJI, over 4,000 African Americans were lynched in the U.S. This history cannot be separated from the history of slavery, settler colonialism, or the displacement of native peoples from their traditional homelands. Third point, current scholarship includes over 500 cases of lynching of persons of Latino or Hispanic heritage. My own research also includes Native Americans, Asians, Jews, and those lynched due to their sexual orientation. And 4, basically, Latinx, Chicanx, and Hispanic communities and individuals can be of any race, multiracial, multi-ethnic, and may identify with their indigenous ancestors. This history cannot be separated from the history of slavery, settler colonialism, or of the displacement of Native peoples from their traditional homelands. White supremacy remains the greatest threat to democracy. And 6, trigger warning. This talk includes images and references to lynching. There's only about 4 images, but I want to warn you ahead of time. If that's not something you want to see, don't feel bad if you need to leave or look away, right? But I think it's important when addressing historical material to address historical material directly, though as it informs my artistic practice, right? So when I exhibit work, I don't exhibit those images, but when discussing a historical context, I need to provide you with a historical representation. And then many of you might be familiar with the National Memorial for Peace and Justice. Many people refer to it as the Lynching Memorial, National Lynching Memorial, which it is not, in the sense that it does not acknowledge or does not intend to acknowledge Latinos, Native Americans, Chinese, or other communities that were lynched in the United States. It has a very specific purpose, and each of those hanging panels represents a county that is represented in that museum's collection with the names of the individuals from that county, right? So just to say that there's additional information available on this site as well. They also have the Legacy Museum, which goes with that to provide viewers with additional information when visiting that site. And this sort of, so that's context. And then in the terms, I live in Los Angeles, and I've been working, actually tomorrow at 1 o'clock, I'm going to be talking with the mayor's office and a group of community members to talk about the question of whether Los Angeles would like to create a memorial for those Latinos that have been killed in Los Angeles. This is the names of basically Chinese that were lynched in this location in downtown Los Angeles, which is unmarked. And there is currently an effort to make a memorial in Los Angeles. And so we're trying to build off of that goodwill of the city and try to add Latinos to the history as well. We don't know that we will succeed. Okay, so why Latinos? Why did they want to kill them so bad? They didn't even know what a Latino was in 1850, right? So here are some of the earliest depictions of Latinos in California. This is Murrieta. This painting stood in the state's capital for many, many decades. And if you've heard of Zorro, that's basically the popular transformation of a historical Latino bandit character. And Tiburcio Vasquez was publicly executed in 1874 and was also quite sort of a celebrity of sorts. And so these two characters, historical figures, often influence the representation of Latinos and Latinos as bandits. You may, for those of you old enough, might remember the Frito Bandito, when there was the corn chips used to be sort of racialized as around criminal Latinos. And so that was removed sometime in the 70s. All right. So how do you know that it's true? All the books that you've read never told you this, and nobody teaches this in any of the schools that most of people get degrees from. So am I making it up? How do I prove that my research is valid? What is an artist doing even talking about historical material? And why do I have to do it? I would much rather have bought the book for $6.95 on Amazon than spent a decade of my life writing it. So in order to find the cases, what I had to do was read the newspapers. And so here you see a Mexican hung, and basically go through page by page. So I read the newspapers for the city of Los Angeles, San Francisco, and Sacramento from 1849 to 1879. Every day that was available through microfilm. And again, I could talk more about microfilm later. For those of you that are interested in doing projects informed by history, you can't just go buy the book online. Sometimes you have to do primary research. You have to add to existing research. That is part of what adds to, what will give your work a voice. And so I'm happy to talk about that more later. This is the first depiction of a Latino in California in the newspaper. It's a depiction of two Latinos that have been lynched. Their bodies are now swinging to the limb where they were executed and will probably continue to boast the wonder gaze of the public until time and decomposition shall allow them to fall to pieces. Los Angeles Star, February 19th, 1854. Images were not yet available in newspapers. So what I see here is a cultural desire. In 1854, not only did they dislike Mexicans, they disliked them so much that they wanted them not just to be dead, because you could just shoot a person. You could just run them over with a carriage, take your horse and trample on them. They wanted them dead forever until time and decomposition allow them to fall to pieces. What other thing can you do to a person that will make it last forever, right? You'll take a photograph, and the photograph will recreate that instant for all time. And so I suggest that there was already a cultural desire for these kinds of images, and that cultural desire then was reflected by artists who created these images, and journalists and documentarians who took the photographs. All right, here are two of Latinos being lynched. And again, I show them because, again, you have probably all seen images of African Americans lynched, but you probably haven't seen an image of a Latino lynched. And they were lynched, and I'm not making it up. And there they are. I'm not going to linger on it. I just want you to know that it exists. And we're going to talk more about it, and I'm going to show you more in a second from the Erased Lynching series. But this is part of that historical section of the talk, giving you sort of data. And so what's this guy talking about? Why am I here? Where's the art? What's going on? My practice is really based in research, and that might be different from a lot of the ways that other people work. I've done painting, I've done ceramic, I've done all kinds of different things. This particular practice developed over a series of time for particular reasons. This is the back of one of the postcards, which I photographed. This is what we do with these people down here, and that's the back of one of the lynching images you just saw. So again, it's not me making it up. I can see in the tone of this text, right, the intentions there, the kind of hatred, racial hatred, that we also have heard elsewhere. We hear currently a lot of anti-immigration rhetoric today still. And then I think this might be the last one. This is the last Latino lynched in California in 1922. And this is the tree on which they were lynched, and this is a policeman standing in front of that tree. And this is his personal notebook. And again, I'm going to move very quickly. That notebook was in his personal collection, and so I could talk more about the implications of that, but for many people, there's circumstantial information suggesting that it was a police killing and not a Wild West lynching, but an intentional killing. And I think, again, I could talk about that more later. From that research, I then created a short film, which I think you can see on my website through my gallery, recreating that last lynching as an 8-minute film in which I don't actually show him ever get lynched. I just show the crowd in the lead up. It was an attempt to try to create a project that would share some of the dynamics of it. And I also did individual still images. So these are images I photographed, hired the cast, rented the car, set up the lighting, did all of that stuff. And again, could talk about production stuff with you later should you have interest in that. And then I wanted to recreate this image of basically the lynching crowd using contemporary figures and including Latino families of color, the sort of diversity that were factually recorded in the cases that I documented. Here's one of the biggest lynchings in downtown Los Angeles, 5 men that were lynched from the I guess it would have been the jailhouse. And this is more specific to the memorial for LA that I'm working on. These are the individuals that were lynched in downtown LA from this spot right here. These are their names, and again, I could talk about it more later. And these are the individuals who were executed legally, according to the law then. But again, we probably would not agree in all cases that they were legal. So you can see just very simply that nearly all of these names are Latino. And so, again, when you're thinking about a city, you're thinking about a history you didn't know, this is a history you probably are not familiar with. And this was Silvas, who is the last one on this list. I could talk more about later, should we have the need to. And here's an image of Miguel Lachenal being lynched downtown Los Angeles. You could see people brought their children to watch, and people brought picnics so they could see it really clearly, and there probably were several thousand at this location. Just overall, again, you could read more in the book. This is just to give you a real quick summary for those that are like, what did that guy say? Quick summary, over 5,000 people were lynched in the United States. That's a fact. Over 500 of them were Latino. That's a fact. That's 10%. California, 354. Number of Latinos lynched in California, 135. Latinos in Los Angeles County, 22. And I have a comparison down here. 36 African Americans were lynched in Atlanta, Fullerton County, total. So when you think of Atlanta as being sort of a very racist center for lynching, anti-Black violence, you don't think of LA County in the same way. And so I wanted to show that they're actually not that far off, right? So we really need to rethink our understanding of our national history, potentially. And then lastly, this is for California. I also was able to uncover African-American cases that were unidentified previously, American Indians, Chinese, whites, and unknown. And whites included people from, you see at the bottom here, 4 Belgians, 1 Canadian, 1 Danish, because at that time many were new immigrants. So anti-immigration rhetoric was often the cause for many of those cases as well. And again, we could talk about that more later. So then what? So then I decided, basically, as I'm doing the research on the book and finding the research for the project, then I started heading out to look for the locations and driving around the state of California, which is very big, and trying to photograph them. So this is one that is basically a lynching of unconfirmed Mexican, 1850. It is a confirmed tree for lynchings, but in terms of the individual names, there's no record. This tree, and when we think about the question of documentary, because I know some people were bringing that up at dinner, okay, it might be the real tree, but the tree was actually across the street. What happened is it fell over, and you see there's a cement block at the bottom. Somebody opened a roadside motel, and they brought the tree over so it would be like a tourist attraction. So when we think about what is true and what is not true, right, all of these things are mitigating. So I'm taking the picture. The series is called Searching for California Hang Trees, not Finding California Hang Trees. And it is not a documentary project. It is a performative project in which I took this body up and down the state 10 different times, 40,000 miles, and took a series of photographs that then I represent with this history when I present myself to people. So it is an embodied history that whether you find it interesting or compelling or not is what I've chosen to do with my time on this planet. And so I'm sharing that information. I share that history, and I believe for me that it's through art that work happens for me. Right? I could write 100 books. I could do a lot of different things, but the making of the art and giving people a chance to visualize and to look at images. So this is with None But the Omnipresent Stars to Witness. Obviously, I don't know where it was in this particular county, and so I would take the quotations are from the newspaper articles, verbatim, and then basically I would go out and try to find locations in those counties. Oftentimes I would start with the city hall or the jail or something like that and then go from there. Some of them are very, like this one is really just in the county. It's just really have no connection, and others are very specific actual trees. So this is an actual tree that there's multiple historical sources to document. Others might be too. So, so I just wanted to highlight that point. The story for this one goes that they chopped off a branch each time they hung someone from it. This one is just outside Hornitos, which is a small little town in California. And so in this case, the town is like, it's a ghost town now. There's no town left. And so that's just the road into town. And so, again, I don't know where on that road, but the road is still the road that was there. And they would have traveled down that road. You know what I mean? So for me, that was enough. And then this one I love also, about 100 yards from the road, which this tree was. Of course, there could have been another tree here, but this road was there in the 1850s, 60s, and they basically chased these guys. It was a multi-day horse race, or tracking them down, trying to find them, hunt them down, eventually decapitating one and doing other things. So for me, this was enough of a sort of a pilgrimage to find a site that would reference that history, though it may not be the exact location. And that's a longer story with that one too. And then this one was, there are none of the trees left in LA, so I took this one as a stand-in for LA. It's in a park in LA, and then I presented it back in the city as a billboard, where people driving, if you've been to Los Angeles, we have this 10 freeway. It kind of cuts through town, and so if you're on the freeway and you're driving at night, this one had a little light, and this tree was just sort of hovering back into the city. So it was a way of bringing the history, for me, bringing the history back into the place that it was from, in a place where nobody acknowledges it and still doesn't. Here's an exhibition. I try to keep track of my time. Oh my God. Everybody okay? Am I talking too fast? Okay. Take a breath. So then I went looking for the trees, and then basically people were like, oh, there's a really pretty tree, Ken. I'm like, oh, shoot. So then I did a series of portraits where I invited young men of the same age and race as the victims to pose for me. And basically, these are shot with an 8x10 film camera, as are the trees. They're all on film. And I would tell them, I would share the history because, of course, they didn't know it. And then I'd say, I'm going to take a portrait of you. I'm going to count to 3, and then I'm going to record whatever you want to do. And so I did a series of those as a way of trying to give a place marker for that, for the bodies. And so as you saw there, they're sometimes shown together, not always side by side, not always exactly in the same configuration. That's up to curators. And there are a bunch of them. I'm just showing you 3. The billboard we've covered, so I can zoom past that. I'm just letting you look at it again. Oh, and this is my transition to the Erased Lynching series. So far we have research on the book. We have this searching for trees, one part of that project. And then we have thinking about these, how do I represent that in bodies, portraiture? And then I'm still not satisfied. What else can I do with this project? So I started removing the bodies. So I took the historic images from the lynching postcards and erased, using Photoshop 2.3 or whatever it was back then, the bodies. Why? Why would I do that? I did that because I wanted to create a space in which we could now think about the conditions that made these acts possible. So now, instead of looking at the twisted bodies of those that were killed, we can now look at the people. Oh, the woman in her lovely fur coat and her hair done up in beautiful curls as she heads past the 2 hanging bodies. Oh, look at the woman here having a cigarette and laughing with her friends as they jeer and cheer. And this was a double lynching of 2 white men who had kidnapped another young man. And for those familiar with their American history, basically the Lindbergh baby was kidnapped, and so these were like copycat kidnappings. And so the community, again, rejected that as a strategy and therefore killed them. And this is the way I showed it in the LA County Museum of Art. This is 2 slides stuck together because it was a very narrow room. So I put the wallpaper on one side. I put a series of the erased postcards on the back, which I'm going to show you in a minute, and then I put a negative version on the opposite side. So when you came in, this is the door over here from the gallery. You walked in to see the mural. You're standing here, and then as you turn around, you saw yourself reflected in the crowd. And if you were standing at this end, you were shoulder to shoulder with the lynchers, and if you were at this end, you were dangling above them, right? So it gave you a chance to experience the history in a different way. And I would also say that in LA, about 40% of museum visitors are Latino kids who are not being taught their own history. And so it was a chance to create this fun house. So the kids would be running and jumping in front of the mirrors and basically have adults standing around them. And so it was to create a space that was not simply photographic, but experiential. This was a version in Paris. It's hard to tell, but that was 20 feet by 60 feet and placed into a 3-dimensional space. Point number 2, photography is not 2-dimensional. Photography is not flat. Everything you learned is wrong. Photography is skinny sculpture. It has a front, it has a back, it has dimension. In the case of the postcard, that dimension means you could mail it through the mail. You could write things on the back, you could write whatever you want, and you could send it off to people that you didn't like. You know what I mean? That's very different than a flat 2-dimensional object. It's a presence. This is the installation I had at the Smithsonian National Portrait Gallery, which has very few images of Latinos. And so what did I put? Not portraits, but I put the absence of portraits. I put an erased wall in which there were no Latino bodies present, right, as a response to the absence, historical absence in our nation's history. Here's someone looking at them. I'll show you just a few examples. This one is of a Jewish man that was lynched. Obviously, he would have been there. So I'm reconstructing the space around it, trying to create an opportunity for us to think about what's left. And in this case, also, that when I took it to the framer wanted to trim this off. And part of the idea of the photograph was to include the idea of the archive and the indexicality and the way that these images move through culture and museums. And here's just a few examples of the erased ones, which don't need a lot of narration. This is a lynching of an unidentified Mexican man, AKA disguised bandit. So that's what they wrote on the bottom. I, of course, removed the body in the middle. You can see these guys smiling and as they pull on the rope, which I've removed, jeering quite happily. This guy might even be Latino. And this is happening along the U.S.-Mexico border. So again, we could talk more about those issues of migration and immigration. This is what he got. That's what was written on the back of it. And again, I just photographed it. I didn't do anything to it. And part of why I showed you that grid is they're often shown in a cluster, not just one at a time. So that if you saw one, maybe you wouldn't get figured out. But when you see a whole cluster of them, I think most people are able to understand what the work is about. All right. And then Italian Americans, who were also once seen as racial others. This one I just lived with a crazy weird dog. Lynched African American. And so obviously in the titles I have to add additional information in the title. Montana, one of the first images of lynching in the United States, the earliest photo at least, 1870. Moreno, Mexican national, lynched with 4 other men. And again, I'm going through this quickly because we'll have time for questions. I think it's reasonable to see in this, my strategy is that the images allow you a way in. They give you something to look at and to think about besides thinking about, right? They open a space, a discursive space for an imaginary, and that imaginary is one that we can fill with all kinds of things. This one you probably all know. The back of that card. This is probably in Mexico, though I can't confirm. This one is in Texas, and there have been a lot of shootings there. There's still vigilantes in Texas, if you were not aware of that. Non-authorized individuals hunting down people who cross the border, occasionally shooting them. And that's the back of that card. All right. I'm going to try to... And that's all of the images together, so I just showed you a few. I have 7 minutes left. I'm going to take a sip of water. Everybody okay? All right. So we're not going to get the whole story here today, but I can at least introduce. So I was like, what is this? Why do they hate Mexicans so much? What's the deal? What's that about? And so I started doing a project thinking about race, and that's what the profile book is looking at, kind of the history of race as a concept, and looking at how art schools did it. So I wanted to make sure to get this in before we all left today because we're all here. What did art schools do? They taught, remember, caricature? So this idea of comparison, this guy acts like a dog, so he looks like a dog. We've all seen birds of a feather flock together. You've probably all heard that phrase. That's Physiognomy 101 from the 18th century. You're quoting some really bad people when you say that. So anyway, one idea was comparison. 2 idea was animal comparison. Again, we're familiar with these through, you can see there's a monkey and a human. The idea of measuring, this we know mostly from art school. So you draw the egg, you put the line in the middle to make a head. All of these conventions have all kinds of implications that we could talk more about later. I just wanted to introduce the idea. And then, of course, we know it leads to the profile and to the idea of the profile we all have from criminology. It begins with the study of classics. Again, your Enlightenment 101. Lavater says, look at the Greeks and we'll copy the beauty there. And so they measured look at that. They measured this guy's ankle. So that's how important it was, right? This idea of quantifying difference. And then here's what all these casts look like that were used at the École des Beaux-Arts for students to copy. Here's the École des Beaux-Arts today. They've removed all those. And so I went on the hunt to find those sculptures, which are the evidence in this crime that is art school, right? Or this idea of constructing a racially neutral body, which is the sort of history of painting initially. So there they all are. Here's, of course, this applied to women as well as men. So you can see the idealization. Look, the Greek figure, Venus, has a pretty normal-looking figure compared to the 19th century version where she's incredibly skinny and she lost her head at the top of her head. No, it's actually a copy of an ancient one, but it makes the point of this idea of an extreme transformation to construct whiteness as an ideal. And then once that ideal has been constructed, what do they do with it? They ship it out to every art school on the planet. So this is at Kanazawa, Japan, has one. They copy this sculpture. And where else? PAFA, Philadelphia, was the very first art school in America. They copy this sculpture. So what happens when everybody's reproducing this image, right, is their very first thing you learn, and first day one is how deep is that going to be ingrained in your imaginary? And then these are just images of copies and casts that I've photographed all over. Again, you could think of them as documentary or not. You could think of them as a part of thinking about decolonizing strategies, about the way that culture moves, about our relationship to whiteness in the arts. And then, of course, the idealized white that comes from that. We're familiar with the odalisque. If she stood up, she would have like 3 extra vertebrae, right? So it's this idealized figure of whiteness that no one can achieve, right? And this idealization around gender, around sort of ability and other issues. And then, okay, 3 minutes. I got 3 minutes. Whiteness, boom, check. Racial difference, Trocadero, ground zero for the construction of race. These are the World's Fairs, you're familiar. So I started tracking down all the sculptures that were ever shown in these World's Fairs and photographing them. Again, much longer story, I could talk about more. Here's how some of them are currently displayed in Paris. The next time you go to Museum of Man. These are some of the machines that were used to measure heads. Actually, they were used to measure plaster copies of heads. There's my head being measured. Oh. Sorry. And then other systems of measuring and drawing. Malvina Hoffman, most famous artist in 1930, first woman to get the largest commission in the history of art in America, $300,000. Nobody's taught her anymore. She does this thing called the Races of Mankind. She's commissioned to sculpt the 104 races of mankind. Yes, that's right, 104. That is a failed project, and these are some of her models. These are important. Again, we could talk more about race and racial constructions later. And then the work that I produce from that project. So I do the research, and then I make a series of images. These are some of the billboards in which I was basically bringing objects together, playing off the idea of what is black and what is white, what is racial difference, what do we see, and I just want to show you at least some of the last images. So these are thinking about race and whiteness, the categorization of sculptures and the display of sculptures as educational devices. That's what all these sculptures are. And then I want to get to this last section. Basically, the display of race. This was the first exhibition in 1915-16 showing Native Americans, whites, and blacks, and prehistoric man. And this is the very first exhibition. Henry Field goes and sees this and creates the Field Museum. Hitler and others and other people, race theorists, love this idea, and they then develop that, and we know where that goes. This sculpture was in that display, see in the back room. So I was looking for these guys, Native American depictions. I was told they're just caricatures, like cigar store mannequins, not real people. And I thought that didn't seem possible. So I found the sculpture, I photographed it. This one's at the Smithsonian. And then I was able to find who it was. I was able to give her back her name, and that's why I wanted to share that with you as far as strategies for art making. So in this case, I know her name, I know where she lived, and I'm able to reattribute that to her likeness. This was the second show in the museum, and I'm just going to end on the last room. Basically, this is the white guys in the National Portrait Gallery of the Smithsonian that you would expect, including Duchamp, America turning her back to us, and then these are Native American busts that I was able to photograph. And I just wanted to show you the last one because I just did a portrait with, so I could tell you these stories if we have time in the questions, but the last one was this bust, which you can see was misidentified. So we went back to the Osage Nation and were able to find a descendant, and then we were able to correct the name in the National Portrait Gallery. So this is now in the National Portrait Gallery and is more accurately depicting that history. And then was able to identify the individual. And then the last slide. And this is his great-grandson that I just photographed 2 weeks ago in the Osage Nation. And so he is going with the Osage community to bless the photograph and the bust at the National Portrait Gallery in August. And this will be a chance for the Osage to not only be taken out of natural history and moved into our National Portrait Gallery. We only have one in the United States, right? And so I was able to increase the representation of Native Americans by 1. Again, it may not seem like much, but from my artistic practice, I'm very proud of that moment and of that legacy. And I'll end there. Thank you so much. Okay, and then do I leave that on?
Thank you so much, Ken. We have some time for some questions.
Yep, you're going to stay up there, Ken. So if you have a question, just put your hand up, and Tara will bring the microphone to you, and we'll go from there.
And it's fine if the question's about your own practice or just where you're at or how I could be helpful. Like, I teach for a living, so I'm happy to help with whatever part. It doesn't mean you need to do work about lynching or do work about racial formation, but there might be stuff about the practice that's helpful for you. And if not, we're going to go eat cookies.
Oh, there we go. Perfect. So, hello, my name is Zeke. I'm an intern here. Thank you for boosting the volume. I appreciate that. I'm always challenging to push my work when it comes to identity and representation and how we explore the boundaries or just even the spaces between them. And I guess my question for you is how do you go about learning about, yes, maybe the work that you're doing or the people that you're working with to run the gambit of the boundary between representing someone and who their identity and who they saw themselves as truly, and I guess the more exploitative side of representing what they may appear to be to everyone else viewing them?
Right. No, that's a great question. It's one that I think every artist that represents a figure of any kind has to deal with. Even if it's your best friend, I teach photo too. Even if it's your best friend and they agree to do it, doesn't mean you don't have power. The power is what art is. And so the negotiating that and thinking about that. Also, what I've really learned is over time, things continue to change. So the initial strategy with the erased lynchings was to remove the body, right? And I was trying to think of ways of not re-victimizing, but trying to get at the larger mechanisms that make these actions possible. And then I used the stand-in body, right, with the portraits, and tried to think of a way to do that. So I've been wrestling with that question forever. And then in the last work, the Native American bust, I photographed actually over 80 busts of different races and was only able to get 5 that were exhibited through the process. Meaning the process was that if you're not familiar with the Smithsonian institutions, there's 22 different institutions, and I had to work with curators at 5 or 6 of them. So every idea I had, there were actually like 40 curators who had veto power, and they used it, and I'm glad they did. You know what I mean? We were trying to find descendants. We were writing to different tribes. We were calling. Why should they take the call from me? Why should they want me to photograph it? Maybe they don't. My practice is my own practice. So in other words, I think as an artist, you can make what you want to make, whether it gets exhibited or whether it resonates or whether it needs to get hidden or destroyed after you make it. But you have to follow your impulse. So my impulse was to represent a community of people that had not been represented in the Smithsonian, and I did, and I had to write a proposal. So that was my proposal ahead of time. And even though I had the proposal, I was accepted as one of a handful of people accepted to do this. Even then, people closed doors on me once I was there. There were all kinds of hurdles. Then once I had the photographs, in order to get a degree of buy-in from the various communities, we didn't hear back from everybody. So that's why I couldn't exhibit them. I still hope I can someday. Some of them are so amazing and powerful, but I have not yet gotten to a threshold where I feel safe showing them. In the case where I have the community support and the descendant, of course, that's why I'm showing it, ending it there. That was really like being hit by lightning, once in a lifetime, or a very difficult statistically to have happen. I will also tell you that in his community, in the Osage, not everyone agrees that this individual's ancestors should be represented. Why not theirs, or why not other members? And so this continues to be a contested debate. For me, I took the picture, did the reach out. The great-grandson is, you mean, and now the community is going to bless it. So, but you could say that the practice has failed, or you could say that the practice has succeeded. And I'm not going to be the one that's going to be able to answer that question in the sense that history will say, right? Because people have tried strategies like this before and failed, or our understanding of it has changed over time. But I think it's fair to say that this reflects my best intentions. Does that answer the question?
Hello? Hey, thank you so much. piggybacking off your, just ending with your conversation with the Osage and the great-grandson, I just want to hear a little more about how that conversation went with him and how that unfolded. I'm just pure curiosity
How the process worked?
the conversation actually with him, and then sort of that negotiation, or if you can expound a little bit on that. I'm intrigued.
Sure. So initially, the Smithsonian is a national museum, and so I was not allowed to speak for the Smithsonian. You know what I mean? So I was not allowed to reach out directly, and so I had to go through a staff member. And so the staff member, the curator, Tainek Carrigal, did all of the initial contacts. And then once the museum, when did it happen? It was very late in the game that I was given the email that I could reach out and talk to him. And so we spoke on the phone, we emailed, and then we've been in touch. So the photograph was taken in 2014, and we were only able to identify it in 2017 as far as descendants and stuff. And then I only just took the photograph of him in 2022. So it's an 8-year project from that first photograph. And actually, I knew of the research for that started in 2010. So it's a 12-year project to get to that last portrait. So for the last one, obviously, I was there physically in person. I went and I spent a couple days there, and I invited him to have his portrait taken as a part of the pandemic portrait series I've been doing, where I've been photographing portraits of people, basically talking to them in whatever degree that they want to talk to me. And then he was allowed to wear, I said it would be a portrait, his name would appear on it, my name would appear on it as being the photographer, and so he should wear whatever he would like me to represent. And I think we both shared the hope that one day it might hang next to his grandfather, great-grandfather, side by side. We share that hope. We have no authority to make that happen. So we talked about that. We talked about other things. We went to lunch. We ate tacos. You know, I mean, it was a regular conversation. I think we also talked a lot about I don't know if I can, there's things about the Osage Nation that there are traditions that are not public. And so it's not my place to, I'm not Osage, so I can't speak for that. I can say that we had a conversation. I, to my best of abilities, tried to explain all of the implications of, I asked for how he'd like to be represented, what he'd like to wear. I shared all of the images. When I do the series, I send all the images back to all the models, and then they have the veto power. And then from there, it could be, I give them 3 categories: like, don't mind, destroy, and as a model. Some people choose to exercise that, some don't. And then for the actual blessing, the date hasn't been set yet, so I may go and join them for that with the community. But they're still working on the date. And that is something, again, the Smithsonian's never done that before at the National Portrait Gallery, so they're not sure how to do it, and also how to get everybody there, and, can you burn something in the gallery? Can you know what I mean? Like the kinds of things that might happen, what is allowed and not. So I think we've tried to be really transparent about all of it. I have a release form as well, as all photographers do. Yeah, does that answer the question? Yeah. I mean, yeah. I feel like we've really enjoyed the time we've gotten spent together. A lot of other ones I haven't, we couldn't find descendants. You often can't find descendants. I have the genealogies for all of them. So I do their genealogies back as far as I can go. And so some of them didn't have children, didn't get married, and, then the question of who can reflect a community? How many people reflects a community? It goes back to that first question of what is democracy in this sense? So if I have a picture of you and everybody else here says that's not a picture of you, or I shouldn't show, you know what I mean? Like, how do we decide? Anyway, it's all kinds of complicated questions. Yeah, thank you. Both great questions, really hard questions. And I'll be here all week too, so like we can also keep talking about them and thinking about them.
So I identify with a lot of your work because lately I have been learning about my own cultural history in the context of this country as a Chinese American person, but also as somebody who was adopted because of the one-child policy. And so recovering and doing the research of that work obviously takes an emotional toll, not only on me, but the people like that I learned that affected. And so I was wondering, kind of like similar to the earlier question, like you have altered these images or juxtaposed them in ways to make people think about their belonging with this history. But like I'm especially interested in like the people that you've invited to participate in like the reenactments and the people who are stand-ins for the Latino bodies that were hanged. Like, how do you interact with those people and bringing them into this project and like trying to educate in a way that is not, I guess, traumatic in a way that I think you know where I'm trying to go with it.
Yeah. Yeah, no, it's a great question. Because, of course, I mean, I already knew it since the book hadn't been written and nobody knew this history. I knew that they wouldn't know the history, right? But I think most people from marginalized communities understand what it is to be marginalized. And so it doesn't take a whole lot of work to get someone to identify or to share those experiences, whatever they might be, around gender, race, culture, class, all kinds of things, education, food preference. It could be anything. So I just did I would usually tell them I was the whole thing. I'm writing the book, not the whole 40-minute talk you got, but a 5-minute version of it. And in my studio, of course, I have images up and I can show them examples. So I would walk them through and give them time, and then basically, that strategy I did. I don't think I would do that again. I only did a few of those because it wasn't right. It didn't seem like I was getting to what I wanted to get to, but that's how I started. And so if you compare that to the last portrait, which is taken 16 years later or something like that, at this point, I'm trying to approach it's still a photograph, it's still a portrait, it's a camera, whatever. But I was trying to create more ways to give the subject full awareness. So like by sharing all the images, by giving these different category levels, and I allow them to they can use any of them at any time on their Instagram. I don't give them the full-size files that would make a print, because I'm an artist, and so I believe, and I argue that as well, that I'm going to make a high-res image, I hope, one day of these various portraits. But as far as their image, they have it as much as I do. They can use it, and they often do it. A lot of times, like if somebody wants to do a headshot or do whatever they need, I shoot whatever. So the initial guys, I was trying to, photographs don't tell the truth. So that was what, as much as I tried to surround the photograph with truth, there's nothing I could do to put truth in the photograph. And so that's why I stopped on that first set. Then I took out the bodies, then I went to the sites. So I was I also wrote a book, I also recorded the history. I've also shared this story with my body, with people like you. So this is like my energy to share it as openly as I can. And so all of those things are, I'm definitely halfway through my lifespan, and so my career of art making years will be, 10, 20 more? You know what I mean? So if you think about a life journey, and I guess I would be halfway through my artistic career. That's what I learned so far. And so if it can save you any time, so instead of having to do all of that, the question of photographic truth is not possible. The question of photographs is flat, it's not possible. Everything is sculpture, everything is dimensional, everything is non-consensual, in the sense that the power of the photograph, no matter what we do, if I take photographs and, there's power in those images, and you can't unmake them. The media tells us that, so I'm rambling. But anyway, trying to think about photographic images as a artistic practice when everyone is a photographer is a hard thing. Maybe we don't need to have photographers anymore. I don't know. So that's as a category, as a major, as a field to study. Maybe that won't exist very much longer.
Thank you. I was curious how you would define an archive and whether or not you believe your work is part of an archive or a comment on an archive.
Yeah, that's a great question, and one that so many scholars are engaged with right now, right? Short version, everything is an archive. right? Whatever. So basically, oh my goodness, this is like a graduate seminar. So we have to get, you know what I mean, to deal with all the elements of it. But the short version is when everything is on the hard drive, it's an archive or in the folder. When it's on the wall, it's an exhibition, it's an event. So the difference between stasis and non-stasis, between action and non-action, is part of what shapes an archive. But an archive will, of course, also be, if you look at the history of, let's say, the history of lynching in California, and anybody working on that going forward will have to acknowledge my work on some level. Even if they say the guy with that crazy artist didn't know what he was doing, he got it all wrong, but to deny it, to deny that I existed would be to deny the archive. So what you're looking at is a living archive, right? Not yet in the past, but nearly. Because the work is historic, it's widely footnoted. Like, it's a weird thing when you see when things around you are moving at different speeds than you are. So the archive is something we all carry. It's something we all activate. It's something that we can reactivate. If we start talking about gluten-free cooking, well, okay, that's a relatively recent thing. But guess what? Maybe your grandmother made a certain kind of pancake, the buckwheat, or whatever, I don't know. And suddenly you reclaim those histories of traditions that were pre-existing. That's the archive, right? And so the archive is living and it's reactivated, but we might change the name of it. We might be looking for something different. What are the categories we're looking for? So the archive is always there. Does that answer the question a bit?
Yeah.
And then there's all kinds of other strategies around naming and and when does a photograph become active? So if you take any one of those images, and that's why the one I showed you with the color bars, so that's a photograph of a lynching postcard at the Smithsonian that somebody who works there photographed as part of their job with the color bars so that there would be color accuracy when it was reproduced later. That was not intentionally left there as a part of an artistic practice. So when I left it in, my intention was to speak to the archive and the fact that this image functions, I took out the slide, but that image functions in 14 different ways. So meaning the first one, if you think about photographic truth or truth at all, there's the event, which none of us were at. Then there's the photograph of the event, which none of us were at. Then there's the negative and its development, which none of us were at. Then there's the print that was then put onto a postcard. And you can see it if we had time to look at it, you'll see it's a different format. It's a Brownie image added to a traditional postcard. So we can date it based on the different technologies of each of those things and by the paper and by the inks. So it's that all an archive in there. Then you didn't get to see it. You didn't get to see my print. You've never seen my print. You've seen a digital version of my print that was in the PowerPoint, which is then projected on a projector that I didn't calibrate. And all of those are steps away from the real. So that photograph represents that I could just think of off the top of my head, no less than 15 steps of difference between the real and you. And so all of those layers are layers of distance between us that we may never cross, right? And so the archive is all of those layers put together and packed and unpacked and all of that stuff over and over again, forever. Sure, thank you so much. Thanks for coming. And I will be here all week in the dark room, so you can always come find me.
Thanks, everyone. And then tomorrow at 8:45, we have orientation in here for all students and faculty, so we'll see you then. Thank you.